New Zealand Rugby has appointed the first former international player to run the game in New Zealand. Former All Blacks and Crusaders midfielder Mark Robinson will take over as CEO in January when Steve Tew steps down after 12 years at the helm. A former chief executive of Taranaki Rugby, Robinson has been on the New Zealand Rugby Board since 2013 and has been the board's delegate to World Rugby since 2014. New Zealand Rugby chair Brent Impey joins me in the studio now. Good evening.
Good evening, Lisa.
You had a lot of candidates here, 84 odd, I think. Specifically, what makes Mark Robinson better than all the others you considered?
We set a criteria, had a board subcommittee of 4 of us, and that criteria, to summarise it, they had to have a deep understanding of New Zealand and its culture, the importance of the rugby as a national game. They had to have a love of rugby, needed to be innovative, both in terms of the game itself, the participation, the fan engagement, monetisation of digital, etc. Had to be a commercial driver because this is a very hungry beast that needs a lot of feeding financially. Had leadership and mana, which brings in the rugby way, the respect and inclusion, and finally connectivity, whether it's be with staff, sponsors, stakeholders or the media. So that was the range. We didn't put any weighting on any of those 6.
Okay, so what consideration did you give to diversity? Because you've talked a lot about this and the need for New Zealand Rugby to be representative of New Zealand society. So I'm wondering how Mark Robinson reflects the diversity of New Zealand.
Yes, well, on our subcommittee there were 4 board members, including Dr. Farah Palmer, and we had a number of applicants. As you said, we had 85. We were able, through that criteria, to reduce that to 6, and we were very aware of the diversity and the need to promote women. So and that was included in our list. But at the end of the day, we had to make a decision on what was best for New Zealand Rugby, given the criteria that we had set.
Because some people looking in from the outside might think you've just replaced like with like. You just got a younger version of Steve Tew.
Well, I don't think that's correct. Mark comes from a completely different background. He's lived in the commercial world. He's been a consultant. He's educated, highly educated. He's younger, and he brings a fresh approach. So I don't see the reasoning in that question.
Okay, so you're a couple of years on from your respect and responsibility review, right? Inclusive leadership was goal 1 there. Yeah?
Yep.
Yeah. So you've got 1 female on the board. You've got Farah Palmer. I'm wondering what material difference has that made to the feel and function of the board?
Well, Farah has made a major contribution, but I agree that we haven't gone far enough. If you look at the percentages of women on New Zealand boards, Super Rugby clubs, provincial unions and New Zealand Rugby itself, we're only at 16-17%. We've got to move that up very, very quickly.
So how quickly, though? How long is it going to take?
Very quickly. The board has...
Time frame?
Okay, the board has determined that we want another woman on our board as the next director coming through, and we're certainly encouraging our provincial unions to nominate. It's a complicated process.
So will that be the position that... Sorry to interrupt, but this is important. So that will be the position that Mark vacates, will it? Are you going to put a woman in that position?
Next year there are 3 vacancies each year, which is what I was trying to say. One is appointed, one is elected but nominated by the provincial unions, and the other is appointed by the appointments panel. So we do have a way in which we can ensure that diversity is achieved. So we've made some progress. Sir Michael Jones, a Pacifica, made some progress. Dr. Farah Palmer, I acknowledge we've got a lot more to do, and we're going to do it.
So did you have a chat to Steve Hansen after his comments about domestic violence?
Yes, we did, and you've heard what Steve's response to that has been, which is essentially that his comments were taken out of context. But here it is: if you set the bar around respect and inclusion high, you've got to live by it, and whether it's domestic violence or it's alcohol abuse or it's supplements, whatever it is, we've got to make sure that bar is lifted. And we're trying to drive this culture not just within New Zealand Rugby at the top level, but right through clubs, etc.
Do you think his comments met the bar that you've set?
I think if he reflected on those comments, he wouldn't make them again. And again, it's all part of a learning culture.
In your opinion,
would I have made those comments? No, I wouldn't have.
Did it meet the bar of your expectations?
I think he could have done better in that situation, yes.
You sound like you're hedging your bets on a really important issue.
That's not hedging. That's not hedging the bets.
Did he meet the bar?
I'm saying that I believe he could have done better in that situation. I've said that.
Because some people will wonder, if you've done this review, right, and you're talking about cultural change and respect, you've had a report, you've had incidents since that report, including Steve Hansen's comments, including investigations into behaviour in South Africa, including, sex in disabled toilets. Is it just window dressing, or are you committed?
We are committed. If you think about the fact that we've got over 250 professional rugby players in New Zealand, the number of incidents that we have per year is very, very small. These are young people, young women, young men. They make mistakes. People make mistakes. They're operating in a pressured environment. We're trying to drive a cultural change. Is it going to be 100% perfect? No, it's not. Can we drive changes in rugby which are going to stretch out to society? Yes, we can. Do I think it's ever going to be 10 out of 10? No, that's not life.
Okay, so today Mark Robinson has made comments when he was talking to our reporter Clay Wilson about Pacific nations' involvement in rugby. And he said that New Zealand Rugby has known for years that they need to do more. So I'm wondering, what more will you do?
Oh, I think this is a big topic and a big challenge. To be honest, I didn't enjoy the match in Hamilton. Here are the reasons why. The Tongan team have got a number of players who were prevented by their clubs in Europe from playing. You know, if they make themselves available for Tonga, they don't get paid. And these people have got young families, and they need to be able to support them. Secondly, New Zealand Rugby has been pushing very hard for a change in the eligibility rules. So a player like Malakai Fekitoa, who played for, or Charles Piatel, played for the All Blacks, give them a stand-down period of a year or so. They go from a Tier 1 nation to a Tier 2. That would have made an enormous difference to that game. And thirdly, and we are committed to this, is to create a pathway for these players. We've looked at, and I was a spearhead of this, looked at a Pacific Island Super Rugby team. We couldn't make it commercially work. That doesn't mean that's the only answer. We're looking at new competitions to be able to enable Pacifica players to play in the Asia-Pacific region, and also much more meaningful games between Tier 1 nations such as New Zealand and Tier 2 nations such as the islands. A lot of work to be done, but we are making progress. Are we frustrated by the failure of the North around these areas, such as player release and eligibility?
Yes, we are. How do you force their hand then?
Well, I think it could well come to almost a really hard push. The other nations around the world, we saw it with the Nations Championship that fell over. It sparked things.
Yeah, what do you mean by a hard push?
Well, you've got to get the votes. In the end, you've got to be able to get sufficient votes to change the rules, and that can be done more so these days because rugby has spread out. But to think that it's easy to knock off the home unions, who are far more traditional in their views than we are, is not straightforward.
Can you get the numbers? I
think we can, and I think that out of following this World Cup and following what I believe is that the gap hasn't got any closer in 25, 30 years between the Tier 2s, such as Tonga, and the Tier 1s. In fact, I think the gap's got wider. So we either do something about it, or in 2048, the Rugby World Cup will be played between the same 6-7 nations as it's always been. So we won't see any expansion whatsoever. So we've got to get on and do it. And one of the things that will happen is that commercial drivers will start to impinge on it.
Got to go, but how many games should the All Blacks play in the Pacific next year? Can you give us a number?
Well, that's a challenge as well, Lisa, because the schedule is so crammed. But there are ways of doing it.
So no commitment for a minimum number?
I can't give you a minimum number, but we are committed to playing using our national teams, whether it's the All Blacks, the Maori All Blacks, or a wider All Blacks team, to playing more games in the Pacific as we go forward. Yes, we are.
Thank you for coming in. So much more to talk about, but we're out of time. That's Brent Impey from New Zealand Rugby.